Thyagraj Stadium, Nirbhaya funds, Uber files, Port Blair, and more. As we inch closer to the end of this year, we bring you the top investigations and impact stories by the Indian Express in 2022. 1. Senior IS officer Sanjeev Khirwar and his wife Rinku Dugga, who is also a senior IS officer, were transferred from their posts in Delhi after the Indian Express published a picture of the couple walking their dog on the tracks of the Thyagraj Stadium, especially at a time when young athletes should have been practicing on it. This is our principal correspondent Andrew Amsan's report. Moving on, our next investigative story on 11th December revealed that several vehicles procured by the Mumbai police at the cost of over rupees 30 crores under the Nirbhaya fund were being used to provide Y+ security to the MPs and MLAs of the ruling Eknath Shinde-led Shiv Sena government. The report created a stir and several vehicles were returned just 2 days after our report was published. Take a look.
The Indian Express reports several vehicles procured by the Mumbai police for fighting crimes against women were instead being used as escort vehicles. These vehicles were being used for the security needs of MPs and MLAs of the ruling Eknath Shinde-led Shiv Sena faction since July 2022. After the Indian Express reported on the story, the vehicles procured for the security of women were returned to police stations where they have been requisitioned. Mohammad Tawer, assistant editor, The Indian Express, who first reported on the story, tells us why vehicles procured by the Mumbai police were used as escort vehicles for MPs and MLAs. He also tells us about the current developments in the case.
In 2013, the central government started a Nirbhaya fund. This is a central government fund, and they provide funds to every state where police forces, where they can use this money to purchase be it cars, whatever they think will help the law enforcement agency tackle crime against women. So it was specifically meant for that. Now what happens is sometimes some state police forces, they do not end up using the entire amount, or they do not make a request. So this time around, Mumbai police had made a request that they wanted to purchase vehicles under the Nirbhaya fund, and accordingly, rupees 30 crores was spent. They bought Ertiga vehicles, Boleros, bikes, and everything. So basically, they received 220 Boleros along with the other vehicles in around March, April. By June, these vehicles had been distributed. Majority of them had been distributed to police stations. Depending upon how big or important the police station is, some police stations got 2 or 1 Bolero, and other police units were also given that. Now, the point of this entire exercise was that these Boleros that you have acquired under the Nirbhaya fund be used to fight crimes against women. So police stations were meant to use these vehicles to, increase their patrolling, reaching a crime scene sooner. Like every police station has a couple of vehicles, and having one more vehicle means that if, for example, at 3, 4 places there are things that they have to go suddenly, they have enough number of vehicles and they can patrol more. And eventually, all this was supposed to help, fight crime against women. So this was the basic purpose why these vehicles had been purchased. What happened is, like these vehicles, they came to Mumbai police headquarters, they were distributed to police stations, and even at police station levels. See, you have to understand that at some police stations, some of their vehicles have gone in for repair and things like that. So it was a welcome break for them to have another vehicle that they could, use to fight crimes against women, to fight generally, use for law enforcement purposes. Unfortunately, what happened is in June they got these vehicles. Then there was a change of government in the state, and Mr. Eknath Shinde and Devendra Fadnavis, they formed the government. So what happened is soon after the police stations had received these vehicles, they were there was an order issued asking some of these vehicles to be returned to the police head motor transport department. So some police officers told me that within 2, 3 days or within a few weeks, they had to just return the vehicle back. They were told that the vehicle was needed for VIP security, basically for MLAs, for providing security to MLAs. There was a need for more vehicles because what happened is after the Shinde government came to power, because they had broken away from the Uddhav Thackeray faction of the Sena, they feared that they may be attacked, and hence all MLAs were given Y plus with escort category. Now, to put it in context, generally an MLA only has an X category security, which means one police personnel, no vehicles. But in this case, since they felt that they were under risk initially, they kind of gave them Y plus with escort, which means 5 policemen along with a Bolero escort vehicle. Now, a lot of people thought that maybe initially they needed it, and later it would be, they would reduce the security because then they formed the government. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So they had basically taken 40 of the 220 Boleros that the Mumbai police received. They had taken 47 for the security of MLAs. Of the 47, while 17 were returned, some after a month, some after 2 months, 30 vehicles remained with them, and now it was 6 months. So a lot of cops said that at police station levels they were falling short of vehicles, and this was unheard of. Like a lot of cops I spoke to who served for 20, 25 years, and they said it's never happened that for security of MLAs, vehicles were being taken from police station, because there is a separate protection and security department. But even because suddenly you are giving security to so many MLAs, I mean, there were, the resources were not there, and hence the security department had to then rely on vehicles from the local police station. So this was the report that we had done, and because of that, what was also happening is that local police station level, sometimes if they, let's say, have to take an accused to the court, they had to borrow vehicles from other police stations, or at times, in fact, one cop told me that they even had to use a private vehicle. So that was the condition that was at the police station level because of the vehicles being taken for MLA security. Soon after the report came day before yesterday, a lot of opposition leaders in the state kind of took up the issue. The Shiv Sena of the Uddhav Thackeray faction held a press conference in which Priyanka Chaturvedi, the spokesman MP, said that if these vehicles were not returned within 7 days, they would be protesting. And the government came in for criticism from a lot of sections, saying that how the security of MLAs and netas was being prioritized over the security of women. When the Prime Minister has time and again said that the security of women is a priority, and that this if they needed secure, and also questions about why would MLAs who have been for 6 months, they have their government, whom were they so scared about, because generally only MLAs who have a specific threat perception or who are cabinet ministers, they get such security. So the general criticism was about who are these MLAs so scared of that they need Y plus with escort category at the expense of security not being provided to women. So after this issue was taken up by opposition parties and the government came in for criticism from several quarters, we were told that a decision was taken. In fact, yesterday, BJP leader Chitra Wagh held a press conference, and she said that within 7 to 8 days, all these vehicles will be returned back to police station following the outrage. And so yesterday we reported, like, by last night these vehicles had started coming back to the police stations. Another thing that I would also add is Chitra Wagh in her press conference yesterday also did mention that while these vehicles had been used by the Shinde camp MLAs, what she said is that some of the vehicles that had been procured in June under the Nirbhaya fund, the Boleros, were also used by the Mahavikas Aghadi leaders like Chhagan Bhujbal. She said even Supriya Sule's convoy had some of these Boleros that had been procured from the Nirbhaya fund. So, I mean, that was the political battle going on. But at the end of the day, the vehicles are some of the vehicles are back in the police stations, and the rest should be returned back to the police stations in the next few days. That's what we've been told.
One of the biggest investigations by the Indian Express this year was the Uber files. In its 8th collaboration with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, Ritu Sareen, Executive Editor of Investigations, Shyamlal Yadav, Senior Editor, and Anand Mohan, a Senior Correspondent with the Indian Express, spent 4 months investigating how Uber found its way through law and regulation in India, and lobbied aggressively with the government while trying to expand in our country.
A new leak of data that exposes Uber. Big revelations in 124,000 internal communications from 2013 to 2017. This is an investigation by The Guardian, ICIJ, and other media partners in nearly 30 countries. This is the Uber files. What are the Uber files all about, and how is this different from other ICIJ projects?
We had done the Pandora papers in October of last year, and several previous projects had also been offshore projects. This is a different kind of project where we are looking at deeply at a corporate entity. We are looking at Uber and also realizing why it is such a giant of the Silicon Valley. And these are actually leaks of a period from 2013 to 17, which was a very tumultuous period in the history of Uber. And that was also the period when they were expanding wildly, rapidly, and a bit carelessly. So what the Uber files really expose is the modus operandi of the company while they were doing this expansion. And it has given very rare insights into how Uber came to India, operated in India, has continued in India.
Yeah, since they entered in India, in fact, what this investigation shows that how they exploited the loopholes in our regulatory system. So when they entered, there were issues with Reserve Bank of India on the payment system of this company, and unfortunately RBI did not react on its own. It was based on complaints from some association. Then there were issues with the service tax. They were not paying the service tax. They were denying. They were saying we are not in any category. Then finance minister in one of the budget speeches, he said the cab aggregators covered under that. Sometimes they say we are transport providers, tour operators. Sometimes they say we are rent a cab. So these all they were doing all tactics to avoid the taxation. Right now also they are facing some complaint from the CCPA, Consumer Complaint that Appellate Authority, and also some court cases are there. So what investigation shows is that how they exploited all our loopholes in the regulatory system.
So, in the wake of the 2014 Uber rape case, a slew of measures were introduced both by Uber and various agencies. And our ground report has found that this security infrastructure that had come in the wake of 2014 Uber rape case is ridden with a lot of loopholes which can be exploited. We have also found one of the major findings of our investigation is that the panic button switch, which is mandated by law as per a notification by the central government, does not work in Delhi. And there are various reasons why this panic button does not work, which we will delve into our story.
So Anand talked about the SOS switch. There is also a lot of reporting that's going to be done internationally about something called the kill switch. Now, this has been written about briefly before during the early years of Uber. And what is very interesting is that the leaked files now show that the kill switch was also used in India. So that was a major finding for us. And very often the kill switch has been used using a technology or a software called Casper and later something called Ripley in many parts of Europe and in several countries. And this has often been done to avoid or to thwart regulatory action, or when, say, the company is anticipating a raid. And there are one or two instances in the files when Uber has tried to use the kill switch but could not. So we have our own, so the files actually expose 13 instances of the use of kill switch, and one of them is in India. That's one revelatory part of what the stories that you're going to read. And the other interesting thing is linked to the 2014 rape, when the files and the leaks and the emails expose the panic in the Uber headquarters in San Francisco, and how the top officials of Uber in emails and communications to each other tried to blame the Indian authorities for it. It also shows how the rape case, in fact, continued to be problematic for the company because the victim had filed a case and all those details are there. So the panic inside the Uber headquarters and the aftermath of the rape case is very important for the Indian Express.
I am telling you, before that I tell you that this company is based in US, but they came to India through Netherlands. And a large sum of royalty fee, the license fee they pay to that Netherlands company and pay very little taxes in India. So that is how they are operating here. And these MOUs they have signed with a number of government organizations, state governments and some private organizations also. But I analyzed the present status of 9-10 MOUs, and most of them are non-starters. The Uber didn't return after the MOU was signed, and it seems that all these were signed to make some inroads in the government machinery, to influence people to protect and to promote their business in India.
So we spoke to over 60 Uber drivers from around 6 states to find out what is the conditions at which they work in, because when Uber had been introduced in India in 2013, they had championed the gig workers economy, and they brought in a slew of incentives. The drivers were given iPhones, and the most of the responsibility was shouldered by the drivers who took loans to buy cars. So these were mostly blue collar workers who started driving a taxi because they were attracted by the incentives. So years later, what we have found is that the condition is it's quite horrible to say the least, because now you have drivers who work 18 to 20 hours in a day. This is because their incentives system has been done away with from 2016. The commission rates which Uber used to take, they used to earlier take 10% commission rates. Now that has been increased to 30%. So, and we all know that there has been a hike in the fuel prices in the country. So all of this has taken a chunk of the savings of the Uber car drivers, who now have to drive 18 to 20 hours in. Some of these drivers drive in extremely hostile conditions, and they don't get to see their families most of the time. And they do all of this work just to keep their cars running. And over a period of 4 to 5 years, the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen instances of people defaulting on their loans. They've had loan recovery agents come harass them on a daily basis. Some of them had to leave their cars and then take up alternative jobs, like they've become shepherds, they've become vegetable sellers, fishermen. There are also cases where drivers have pawned off their wives' jewelry. Their kids have dropped out of private schools. So all the dreams and aspirations that they had is gone. And now they just hope to just survive and make it, and make sure that they end up paying their monthly EMI installments and just somehow survive.
Moving on, while the world would remember Messi's historic win at the FIFA World Cup this year, we must not forget the human cost of the tournament. Mihir Vasavda, assistant editor from the Indian Express, undertook an 8-month-long investigation that revealed how the families of Indians who died in Qatar worked on projects linked to the World Cup and received no compensation.
What happened to hundreds of the Indian labourers hired by Qatar for next month's Football World Cup? Qatar has been criticized for its treatment of foreign workers. In fact, several Indian migrant workers have died while working on projects linked to the World Cup. After Qatar won the rights to host the World Cup in 2010, it became a preferred destination for workers from India. Many of these workers came from rural parts of the country. But the workers and the families of those who died while working there say the ground reality is very different from what they signed up for. Once they arrived in Qatar, many of the workers say they were made to work long hours in harsh weather conditions, were given unsanitary accommodation and paid low wages. There was also no mention of insurance or compensation in case of deaths or accidents. Human rights groups have accused Qatari authorities of failing to investigate the cause of migrant workers' deaths. For more, you can check out our investigation on the IndianExpress.com website.
The next investigative story takes us to Port Blair, where Ritu Sareen from the Indian Express learnt that over 20 women alleged that they were taken to the residence of Jitendra Narayan, an IS officer and former Chief Secretary of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and were sexually assaulted. The woman's complaint, accessed by the Indian Express, gives a detailed account of the violent sexual attack on her on 2 occasions in April and May at Narayan's official residence. What started with just one complaint of sexual assault and gang rape in the month of October ended up pointing towards an alleged job for sex racket. The investigation revealed the way in which the IS officer during his year-long tenure, along with Labour Commissioner R.L. Rishi, a driver and a hotel owner, led the conduct. A day after the Indian Express reported the allegations, Narayan got suspended through orders of the Home Ministry and non-bailable warrants were issued against Rishi. The police too set up an SIT probe into the matter, found evidence and recorded key witness statements that pointed to an alleged racket. Hari Kishan Sharma led an express investigation into 2 Khargaon houses built under the beneficiary-led construction component of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana during 2017-18. Hasina Fakhru's house was bulldozed after being declared illegal, becoming a subject of the case in the Supreme Court. While Leela Bai's house was damaged in stoning by a mob a day earlier following the violence that erupted during the Ram Navami procession in Madhya Pradesh. Around 180 people were arrested in the violence.
हमारे घर पे बुलडोजर चला दी, मेरी पोरी भी घर में, मैं भी घर में, मैंने भी कर रही थी, मैंने क्या मैं यहीं मरूंगी।
मैंने सबसे रिक्वेस्ट करी सर कि सर ये हमारा मकान आवास योजना में बनाए, कोई ने कुछ नहीं करा, क्योंकि नहीं टिकेगी टूटेगा, क्योंकि टूटेगा क्योंकि
two-part series by the Indian Express, Ritika Chopra and Saurav Roy Burman investigated how the NCERT had deleted sections of lessons of India's past, such as those on the emergency, Gujarat riots, Dalit minorities, and Muslim rulers of the country. The concluding leg of the investigation even revealed the involvement of members of the RSS in making decisions on restructuring the national curriculum framework for schools.
Key lessons deleted in NCERT school textbooks. The Indian Express matched NCERT's revisions with content in 21 history, political science and sociology textbooks for classes 6 to 12 and found some sweeping changes.
We were aware and that the NCERT is in the process of rationalizing textbooks. I use the word rationalizing because that's the term that NCERT has been using officially. This started about 6 months ago, last year in December, when NCERT, in an official communication to its department head, said that during COVID, kids, haven't had enough time to kind of cover the syllabus and curriculum. So maybe we should try and reduce the curriculum load. And that was the ground that was presented to justify this entire exercise, that this is being done to help kids out across classes 6 to 12. That is an overwhelming amount of information. So for the project, what we decided to do is that we chose social science because BJP's history with revising social science textbooks has been a bit controversial at the time when it was in power, when Vajpayee was the prime minister. So we decided to just look at social science, which is essentially political science history. We didn't look at geography, we looked at political science, we looked at history and sociology in classes 11, 12. And just sort of very dispassionately look at the changes that have been made in the textbooks, from the point of view of quote unquote reducing curriculum load. So these were essentially 21 textbooks of history, political science, sociology from classes 6 to 12. It was a lot in itself. And what we did was, you have to remember that these textbooks haven't been reprinted. So what NCERT has done instead has printed booklets, little booklets for each class along, and each booklet carries a table of changes, sort of for reference, will provide you the textbook name, the chapter, page number, and what has been dropped or changed. Because, it mentions a certain page and says box 7.8 dropped, or mentions a certain page and say line 7 to 8 dropped of the second paragraph. So you have to constantly keep going back to the textbook to match it. And again, then that's not where the exercise ends. In order to, kind of do this thoroughly and exhaustively, what I had to do was that I had to read the entire textbook and not just refer to the bits that have been dropped, just to kind of, get a sense of, why this thing that has been dropped was mentioned in the first place. What was the context? Most of the changes were kind of fitting three baskets. One was that there were many changes as far as contemporary India is concerned, India post-independence. There was a lot of content from that time period which was being changed. So for instance, the first part is on contemporary India. So the reference to at least two references to Gujarat riots have been dropped. Then there were overwhelmingly, actually, what really stood out for me is that how much content with regard to resistance, protests, and social movements was removed. It to a point that almost everything to do with protests and social movements has been completely removed from political science textbooks classes 6 to 12. There were at least 3 chapters that have been dropped from the textbooks from classes 6 to 12. The only chapter on social movements that has been retained is in actually class 12 sociology. So only if you opted for sociology in class 12 would you actually get to study it. And even that chapter, there are a lot of changes that have been made. So that really stood out for me. And by the way, these chapters, just to give you an example, the social movement chapters actually deal with protests in contemporary India, protests that have happened after independence. For instance, Narmada Bachao Andolan, the Chipko movement, all references to, if you can call the Naxalite movement a movement, but all references to Naxalism, Naxalite movement completely removed. Very interestingly, this was a very small part of the story, but just to give you another example of what has been removed with regard to contemporary India, is that this was the only mention, and I checked this thoroughly, across all history textbooks and political science textbooks from classes 6 to 12, the only mention of sedition, why it's controversial, or rather why is it an arbitrary law, that mention has been dropped completely, along with a small exercise, just 2 small questions, which ask students to state why this is an arbitrary law and why they think this was arbitrary. Just to give you another example, our part 2, by the way, since we are talking about themes, so I'll just quickly tell you, the second theme was cuts related to caste discrimination and minorities, that content. And the third theme, of course, was a very obvious one. There was no surprises there. There's a lot of content that was cut with regard to rulers of the Delhi Sultanate era and the Mughals. And this is something that members of the BJP have said it time and again. In fact, more so now, like in the last 1 year, they've made several mentions of how they feel that the Indian history, especially one that's taught in schools, is not an accurate representation of what happened in the past. In fact, certain rulers or certain invaders, quote unquote, are glorified at the expense of others. What was very interesting is that while I was working on this project, I noticed that one table pertaining to the class 7 history textbook had been mysteriously dropped and replaced with something new. We had downloaded all the tables, we kept it with us, which is why we were able to tell the difference, because there were at least 5 changes which were there in the old table in the class 7 history textbook, which were not there in the new table. And by the way, the class 7 history textbook is the only textbook which has 2 whole dedicated chapters, one to Delhi Sultanate and one to the Mughal Empire. And two more, apart from these 2 chapters, 2 additional chapters in which a majority of the content is focused on the Mughal era and what happened immediately after the downfall of the Mughal era. So there are essentially these, and so I think almost 90% of the cuts pertaining to the Delhi Sultanate, basically Muslim rulers of the country, are in one textbook, and hence majority of the cuts pertaining to these 2 eras are in the history textbook. And it was for this textbook that there was initially a table and then a new one. So we have made it a point to point out what is it that was there in the old table, which no longer reflects on the NCERT website. And what was interesting is that one of the changes is about Mahmud Ghazni of Afghanistan. He, by the way, is popularly known as the invader who raided the Somnath temple. So with regard to him, by the way, he hasn't been mentioned in detail. It's in just one chapter. I think at best there are maybe 3 paragraphs, actually not even 3 paragraphs on him. So as far as he's concerned, they have dropped the word Sultan from that title from his name. And very interestingly, there's one sentence which says that he raided the subcontinent several times, So they've tweaked that sentence to state that he raided the subcontinent 17 times, fair enough. But what they've added is with a religious motive, that his invasions were motivated. I mean, they had a religious motive behind it. And just immediately after this, there is a paragraph which talks about how Ghazni, the invader, also took a lot of interest in the people that he conquered. And how did he take interest? By, sort of commissioning a scholar to document their lives. So they've dropped that paragraph itself, where he seems to have shown interest in people he conquered. For instance, the Delhi Sultanate chapter, they have dropped the bit on expansion of Delhi Sultanate towards south of India. And in the Mughal Empire chapter, they have dropped a lot of tables with on the achievements and milestones of different Mughal emperors. But yeah, so most of the changes with regard to the Muslim rulers are in one textbook, purely because most of the content on them is in that one textbook. Another textbook where they are mentioned in detail, there was one chapter called in class 12 history textbook. It's called, I forget what it's exactly called, but it's essentially on chronicles that were written during the Mughal era, basically, because a lot of these Mughal emperors employed scholars to, kind of chronicle court scenes and chronicle their life through paintings and stuff. So that whole chapter was about how these chronicles have been helpful for historians to understand life during that era. So that whole chapter in class 12 has also been dropped. So yeah, so in short, content pertaining to them have suffered pretty deep cuts in the textbook revision. Yeah. But yeah, coming back to how we tried being fair is that I remember in one of the changes made, I forget which textbook, but the definition of what Dalit means, that it basically means broken, and why untouchables sort of identify themselves as Dalit, that was there. And if I wanted, we could have had that also as one of the changes, but I realized that same definition was also mentioned in a few other chapters. So to be fair, if that exact definition was mentioned elsewhere and dropped here, we didn't put that in the second part, but there were certain, especially a lot of examples with regard to how untouchability operates in real life. What does the ordeal of a manual scavenger look like? Or how the caste system ensures that Dalits are confined to certain occupations. Those specific sentences being dropped. That seemed like a pattern we thought it was worth flagging. So while going through these books, what I realized is that, some of the changes seemed very selective. A couple of sentences a couple of words being removed from certain sentences. Now that exactly, I don't know. I mean, that seems too selective and doesn't really fit the idea of reducing curriculum load. How does tweaking a sentence change anything? I get it at some level, maybe dropping a chapter or dropping a chunk of it can still be justified, but making very specific changes with reference to, say, Dalit, discrimination or untouchability, that kind of, there was a certain pattern that was emerging. So, we started with just matching the tables with the textbooks. Once we had made a list of the changes, then going back and reading all the chapters to understand where these changes fit and what impact they have. Once we had read those chapters and we reread them, reread everything to understand if there are any patterns that were emerging, but just those changes by themselves in isolation, kind of may not fit together. So we did that. And I think it was by the third reading, we were able to identify patterns. We spoke with the NCERT director, Mr. Dinesh Saklani. He joined pretty recently. He joined in February. By the way, this is when the entire rationalization exercise was kind of pretty much over. I think almost 99% of it would have been done. So he kind of joined at the fag end of it. So a lot of these changes had been finalized by them. His initial response to us was that, it would be unfair for me to comment on it because, everything was done and dusted by the time I came in. So I wouldn't want to comment on. This is around the time when, right before the first part came in. At that point, he said that, he's kind of tried to take more interest in what happened back then. And he has realized that this was a very professional exercise conducted by NCERT, that there were external experts invited for the entire exercise, and that NCERT maintained an arm's length. It didn't interfere with what experts felt with regard to what content should be dropped and what should be retained. And essentially that this is an exercise which is not limited to social science. This is an exercise which is done across subjects, and that we are possibly being selective in highlighting only what happened in social science. And finally, that NCERT couldn't be unfair to the kids, which seem to have gone through a lot in the last 2 years. Especially, there wasn't enough time academically and emotionally, and that there wasn't enough time to even cover the syllabus. So and just for, say, social science, by the way, is one subject in class from classes 6 to 12. It's only in history that you study history, political science. All of them are separate subjects. For one paper, of which maybe history just makes up 20 or 30 marks, how much should kids study? So we had to be fair to them. That was their response. When we asked them specifically about the discrepancies between the two tables that I mentioned, he wasn't aware of any old table or a new table. He said that maybe it was sort of a working draft or something that went up by mistake, and that we should stick to whatever it is that is finally up on the NCERT website. This exercise completed, they were way behind schedule. For textbooks to have been reprinted, they should have finished a rationalization exercise at least 6 months back. They finished that pretty late. So now what they have done is that instead of reprinting textbooks, which takes time, they have printed these little booklets, which, by the way, these changes are effective immediately, and students, the stakeholders will have to refer to these booklets, which are being distributed freely.
Last but not the least, in Bangalore, the National Green Tribunal took cognizance of an express report by Akshiv Thakur and imposed an environmental compensation of Rs 500 crores on the Karnataka government. Reasons? The government failed to 1. Maintain the Chandapura lake in Anekal Taluk, and 2. Restore the water body. The NGT also constituted a 7-member joint committee to look into the matter. The express impact does not stop there. The received compensation amount would be utilized for restoration measures, preferably within 6 months as per directions and supervision of a monitoring committee. In a bid to protect Chandapura Lake from further pollution, the Bangalore Urban Deputy Commissioner K. Srinivas informed that 4 urban local bodies will get solid waste management plans which will be operational by 2023. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. This is Ariba. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, The Indian Express.